I spent 20 years away from my daughter, thinking time would heal what my absence had broken. When I heard she was getting married, I saw my chance to make things right. I poured my heart, my time, and over $40,000 into planning her perfect day. Flowers, music, food, every single detail chosen to tell her, without words, I'm here now. And then one afternoon, I walked past a half-open door and froze. Her voice, cold, deliberate, drifted out. If Dad asks, tell him he's not invited. My world stopped. My chest felt like it had been kicked in. I stood there, trying to breathe, while the sound of her laughter twisted the knife deeper. But here's the thing. I didn't confront her, not right away. Because if she thought she could erase me from her wedding, she was about to learn something I'd never had the chance to teach her before. What happens when a father stops begging for a place in his own family? And on her wedding day, I would give her a gift she would never forget. I hadn't seen Lily in person for almost 2 decades. 20 years of birthdays missed, graduations I only saw in photographs, and milestones relayed through secondhand phone calls. Divorce had split us cleanly, but not neatly, leaving me on the far edge of her life. I told myself back then that I was giving her space, that my absence was better than fighting her mother for time I'd never really win. The truth was uglier. It was easier to stay away than face the cold wall in her eyes. When I heard she was getting married, something in me stirred. A raw, aching need to make amends before it was too late. I didn't want to be just a name in the guest book, or worse, a ghost she had to explain to her husband. This was my shot to show her that the man I had been was not the man I was now. I arrived at her apartment unannounced, holding an old shoebox in my hands. Inside were photographs from her childhood. Lily in pigtails on her first day of school, her gap-toothed grin at the county fair, the macaroni necklace she'd made for Father's Day in 2nd grade. I'd kept them through every move, every lonely Christmas. I didn't know if she'd want them, but I knew I had to try. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in shock. She didn't invite me in right away. For a few seconds, she just stood there, arms crossed, scanning me like she wasn't sure I was real. "Dad," she said finally, her voice flat. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't closed off either. That was more than I'd hoped for. I told her why I'd come, and after a long pause, she nodded. "We're still figuring things out," she said, referring to the wedding. "But if you want to help, I guess we can find something for you to do." That tiny crack in the door was all I needed. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into planning like it was the most important project of my life. I booked the flower arrangements, a blend of pale roses and hydrangeas, exactly the kind her mother carried on their wedding day. I hired a jazz quartet for the reception, the kind of music Lily used to fall asleep to when she was small. I paid deposits for the venue, the catering, the photographer. All told, I had already covered over $40,000 worth of services. Every invoice felt less like an expense and more like an offering at the altar of reconciliation. She was polite, even grateful in a restrained way, but there was a distance in her tone that never seemed to close. I told myself it was just time. Time that would wear down whatever hesitation she had left. There were moments, though, when I caught her glancing at me like I was an unexpected guest in her own story, someone she hadn't decided whether to keep. One Saturday afternoon, while confirming the cake order, I ran into my cousin Denise at the bakery. She knew Lily well and had always been straight with me, even when it hurt. We chatted for a bit before she lowered her voice. "Ethan," she said, "I'm glad you're back, but don't think she's just forgiven you. There's a lot of old hurt there, and not all of it's gone." I smiled like I understood, but inside, her words landed heavy. I had been telling myself that love and money and effort would erase the past, that all I had to do was keep showing up. But Denise's warning clung to me the rest of the day. It was the first time I let myself consider that no matter how much I gave, there might still be a part of Lily that didn't want me there at all. Still, I kept moving forward. I had learned long ago that regret was a dead end. Action was the only way I knew to keep from drowning in it. If I could just get to the wedding day, see her walk down the aisle, maybe, just maybe, the years between us would finally shrink to nothing. The first time I saw her truly smile at me again was in a bridal boutique on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The shop smelled faintly of lavender and new fabric, racks of ivory and blush gowns stretching to the far wall. She stepped out from behind the curtain, wearing a simple satin dress, the kind that let her eyes and her confidence shine. "What do you think?" she asked. And for the first time in years, her voice carried a trace of warmth. "You look like your mother did the day I married her," I said, before I could stop myself. For a moment, the air shifted. Lily's lips curved into a small smile, and she twirled, letting the fabric sweep across the polished floor. We spent the next hour debating between lace sleeves and a strapless cut, the boutique staff darting in and out with pins and measuring tape. It was easy, natural, almost like the gap between us had never existed. A week later, we went to the cake tasting. The table was lined with tiers of buttercream, fondant, and ganache, each slice decorated like tiny works of art. We tried lemon raspberry first, then chocolate espresso. She laughed when I got frosting on my shirt, and I laughed when she declared the champagne sponge was pretentious. For 2 hours, we were just a father and daughter making choices together. I left that bakery thinking, this is it. This is how we fix it. In the following days, we met with the florist, walked the venue, even sat together to finalize the playlist for the reception. She teased me for adding Sinatra, and I teased her for insisting on a 90s boy band. These moments, stitched together, felt like a bridge slowly forming over 20 years of silence. But just as quickly as the closeness had returned, something began to shift. It was subtle at first, a missed text here, a postponed meeting there. The seamstress appointment got rescheduled without explanation. The follow-up with the photographer happened without me. When I asked about the seating chart, she said it was already handled and changed the subject. Then came the day I arrived at the venue to discuss lighting arrangements, only to find that Lily wasn't there. Instead, a woman I barely recognized, Mark's stepmother, was standing at the head of the table, flipping through a binder. "Lily asked me to fill in," she said, with a polite but dismissive smile. I tried to play along, but the unease was growing. Decisions were being made, big ones, without me. The floral designs I'd paid for were swapped for something entirely different. The band had been replaced by a DJ. Even the menu was altered, removing the dish I'd chosen as a nod to Lily's childhood favorite. One evening, after another meeting I wasn't told about, I drove past Lily's apartment. I knew it was uninvited, maybe even inappropriate, but the knot in my chest needed untying. Her car was parked out front, the living room light spilling onto the pavement. I was about to knock when I heard her voice through the half-open window. "If Dad asks," she was saying, Tell him he's not invited." The words landed like a blunt instrument to the ribs. I froze, gripping the railing until my knuckles went white. A second voice, I couldn't tell whose, laughed softly in reply. Then Lily's voice again, lighter, almost mocking. "It's easier this way. He's too much." Too much. I stepped back into the shadows, my pulse pounding in my ears. The air was cold, but I barely felt it. Every memory from the past months, every smile, every shared decision, every cautious joke unraveled in seconds. The warmth I thought we'd rekindled wasn't a bridge after all. It was a stage, and I had been the fool dancing on it, thinking the performance was real. I drove away without knocking. My hands shook on the steering wheel, not from anger, but from the hollow space opening inside me. I told myself I needed time to think, to understand, to find out why. But another voice, sharper, more wounded, whispered that maybe I already knew. That night, I lay in bed, replaying her words over and over. Not invited. Easier this way. Too much. They stacked like bricks, building a wall higher than the one we'd been trying to tear down. I didn't sleep. I didn't even close my eyes. I just stared at the ceiling, feeling every mile of those 20 years between us all over again. For 2 days, after hearing her words, I barely left the house. I sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, staring at the same page of a newspaper I wasn't reading. My mind kept replaying her voice, the tone she used. Not angry, not even emotional, just final. I thought about the birthdays I'd missed. The 5th one, where I sent a card and got no reply. The 10th, where I called and was told she was busy. The 18th, when I didn't even know what city she was in. I remembered the night of her high school graduation, sitting in my car in the parking lot because her mother had told me, "It's better if you don't come inside." I'd left without even seeing her walk across the stage. Those memories had always stung, but now they burned like fresh wounds. I had believed the wedding was my chance to write a different ending. Every bouquet, every paid invoice, every shared moment had been a brick in the bridge I thought we were building. Now, I saw that bridge crumbling in real time, and I was still standing on it. But I couldn't accept it without knowing why. People don't just turn this cold for no reason. At least I didn't want to believe they did. So I started asking quiet questions. I didn't confront Lily. Instead, I reached out to people around her. A cousin who'd been to her engagement party. An old neighbor who still talked to her mother. Even one of the bridesmaids I'd met during the cake tasting. I kept it casual, careful not to sound desperate. Pieces began to fall into place. A few mentioned hearing that I had abandoned Lily after the divorce, that I'd chosen a new life over her. Others repeated a claim that I was trying to take over the wedding planning, that I'd already changed vendors and decisions behind her back. None of it was true. I'd left because the custody agreement gave me no leverage, and I'd changed nothing without her consent. But the details didn't matter. The seed had been planted. What struck me was how consistent the source seemed to be. When I pressed gently, more than one person mentioned Mark's name. At first, I didn't want to believe it. Mark had always been polite with me, shaking my hand firmly, thanking me for contributions. He was the one who'd invited me to the engagement dinner when Lily was hesitant. He'd smiled at me across the table like we were on the same team. I decided to watch more closely. The next time we were in the same room, a quick meeting with the florist, I paid attention. When I made a suggestion about centerpiece arrangements, Mark cut me off with a cheerful, "We'll see, but Lily's already leaning another way." His tone was light, but I noticed Lily's shoulders stiffen. Later, I lingered near the back hallway of the venue office while Mark talked to the coordinator. I caught fragments of his voice. Ugh, he's a bit controlling. Don't let him change things. Keep it between us. The coordinator nodded like this was normal. That was the moment the last piece locked into place. It wasn't Lily's stepmother pulling strings, or her mother whispering old grievances. It was Mark, the man I thought was helping bring me closer, who was pushing me out. The betrayal hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just that he was poisoning Lily against me. It was that he'd done it while letting me think he was an ally. That kind of duplicity takes effort. Driving home that night, I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I wasn't angry in the way I used to be when I was younger, loud and impulsive. This was a colder, steadier burn. I realized that if I wanted the truth to come out, and if I wanted to walk away with even a shred of dignity, I'd have to be deliberate. Mark wanted me gone from the wedding. Fine, but he wasn't going to get the quiet, shameful disappearance he was counting on. The next morning, I sat at my desk with a stack of contracts and a pen. Each document bore my name at the top: catering, band, floral arrangements. All of them had my signature and my money attached. I read them slowly, one by one, as if I were committing them to memory before erasing them. I started with the caterer. The menu had been finalized weeks ago, the deposit wired directly from my account. I called the owner, explained calmly that due to unforeseen changes, I would no longer be responsible for payment. My voice was polite, steady, almost cheerful. She tried to protest, but I reminded her the contract was with me, and my name would no longer be on it. The band was next. The leader recognized my number and greeted me warmly, asking about the father-daughter dance we'd discussed. I told him there wouldn't be one. Silence stretched on the line before he promised to send a cancellation confirmation. Finally, the florist. She had been excited about the special arrangements we'd chosen. Pale roses to match Lily's mother's bouquet. I canceled without explanation. I didn't owe one. By noon, every contract I'd paid for was undone. The deposits were gone, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that the responsibility and the control had been pulled out from under them. If Mark wanted me gone, he could have the wedding without my support, without the safety net I'd been quietly holding in place. And yet, outwardly, I kept up the appearance of involvement. I answered emails from the venue, confirmed I'd be there for the rehearsal, even texted Lily about a last-minute idea for the table settings. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Nothing in her tone suggested she knew what I'd done. The day before the wedding, I sat in my living room with a small wooden box on my lap. Inside was the photo album I'd brought when I first came back into her life. The one filled with pictures of her childhood. I'd added a few more over the months. Candid shots from the dress fitting, the cake tasting, the moments I thought were steps toward something better. Beneath the album, I placed a letter. I wrote it slowly, choosing my words with care. I told her the truth about the past, that I hadn't left because I didn't care, but because the court and her mother had made it nearly impossible to stay. I explained that every step I'd taken since returning was meant to show her I was still her father, that I was here. Then I told her what I'd learned about Mark, how he'd been the one to spread the rumors that I was controlling and untrustworthy, how I'd overheard him making sure I was shut out. I didn't ask her to cancel the wedding. I didn't tell her what to do. I only asked that she read the letter and know the truth before she said her vows. That evening, I drove to her apartment building and left the box at her door. I didn't knock. I didn't want to see her face when she opened it. Hours passed without a call, a text, anything. I told myself she might still be reading, or thinking, or confronting him. But when my phone finally buzzed, it wasn't her. It was the venue, confirming final head counts and setup times. I went to bed uneasy, but with a sliver of hope that the next day would bring some signs she understood. Morning came, bright and sharp. I checked my phone. Nothing from Lily. No missed calls, no messages. Through a mutual contact, I learned she'd read the letter the night before. And then she'd gone ahead with the rehearsal dinner, smiling for pictures, standing beside Mark like nothing had changed. That knowledge hit harder than I expected. I had given her the truth, handed it to her in plain words and photographs, and she had chosen silence. Not just silence toward me, but toward the reality that was about to become her marriage. For the first time since I'd returned, I didn't know whether my absence tomorrow would hurt her, or if she'd welcome it. The morning of the wedding broke bright and still, but the quiet didn't last. By 8 o'clock, my phone started buzzing. First the caterer, then the florist, then the band. Each voice on the other end carried the same edge of urgency. We need payment before we can set up. I listened, calm, confirming that my involvement had ended weeks ago, and that any arrangements would now need to be made with Lily or Mark. By 9, the venue staff was fielding calls of their own. The caterer refused to unload the food without the remaining balance. The florist's truck sat outside the gates, blooms wilting in the morning sun. The band was already at the reception hall, but wouldn't unpack their instruments until they were paid in full. Inside, the ripple turned into a wave. I wasn't there, but I could imagine the scene. Mark pacing, his voice rising with each phone call, his parents huddling with the coordinator, writing checks they hadn't planned to write. Lily darting between the bridal suite and the reception hall, her smile slipping every time she thought no one was looking. It wasn't chaos for the sake of chaos. It was a reminder, quiet but undeniable, of just how much of this day had been built on my shoulders. Shoulders they decided to shove out of the picture. By early afternoon, I drove to the venue. I didn't dress for the wedding. I wore a simple suit, no boutonniere, no tie. The parking lot buzzed with late arrivals, their chatter muted by the tension hanging in the air. I found Lily just outside the bridal suite. She froze when she saw me, bouquet in hand, hair pinned perfectly. "Dad," she said, her voice flat. A mirror of the day she'd first opened her apartment door to me. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled a slim folder from inside my jacket and handed it to her. Inside were copies of every contract I'd signed, each one marked with the date I'd canceled, and receipts for every dollar I'd paid. Tucked among them was a printed transcript of the coordinator's notes from the day I'd overheard Mark telling her to keep me out of things. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages. I watched her face, searching for some crack in the calm, some flash of recognition or regret. She stopped on the page with Mark's name in black and white, but her eyes didn't lift to meet mine. "Why are you here?" she asked finally. I took a breath. "To give you this, and to say one last thing." I glanced past her to the open doors of the reception hall, where guests were milling, unaware of the storm that had rolled through that morning. I've tried, Lily. I've tried harder than I've tried for anything in my life. But this, I tapped the folder in her hands. This is the last time I'll fight for a place in a family that doesn't want me. Her lips parted, but no words came. I wish you happiness, I said softly. This is the last time I try. Then I turned and walked away, my steps steady even as something inside me cracked. I didn't look back. Behind me, the murmur of conversation rose, followed by the sharper tone of Mark's voice. Maybe the truth would spread through the crowd before the first toast. Maybe it would take weeks. Either way, it was out now, no longer mine to carry. As I reached my car, the air felt different, lighter, though not in the way I'd hoped. It wasn't relief so much as release, the kind that comes when you finally set down a weight you've been holding too long, even if it leaves your hands empty. I drove away before the ceremony began, before the music swelled and the doors opened. Somewhere behind me, she would walk down the aisle without me, and I would not be there to see it. The wedding began nearly an hour late. Guests shifted in their seats, whispering about the holdup, their eyes flicking toward the reception hall, where the staff scrambled to catch up. The flowers looked hastily arranged, the music felt disjointed, and the food, when it finally came, was lukewarm. Smiles were tight, laughter forced. Whatever magic the day was supposed to hold had been thinned out, stretched too far to feel real. I wasn't there to see it, but word traveled fast. Some guests left early. Others stayed only out of politeness. Mark was seen snapping at the photographer, his jaw tight, his tone sharp. Lily did her best to keep up appearances, but even in the carefully edited photos that surfaced later, her eyes didn't match her smile. Weeks passed before I heard anything directly from her. In that time, I heard from others that the tension between her and Mark had grown. The truth, it seemed, had a way of seeping into the cracks. Eventually, Mark admitted, under pressure, that he'd been the one spreading the rumors about me. His justification was thin. He claimed he was protecting her, that my presence was too much for a day that should have been about them. But damage has its own timeline. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal just because someone finally admits they were wrong. It was on a quiet Sunday afternoon when she came to my door. I opened it to find her standing there in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked smaller somehow, as if the weeks had worn her down. "Dad," she said, her voice catching. I know what happened. Mark told me everything." I let her in. She didn't sit right away, just stood in the middle of the living room, her hands twisting together. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I should have listened. I should have known better. And I wish," she swallowed hard, "I wish you'd been there that day." The apology was real. I could hear it in her voice. For a moment, I felt the old instinct to close the distance, to tell her we could pretend none of it had happened. But then I remembered the years, all 20 of them, where the distance hadn't been my choice, and the past months where she'd let someone else build it higher. "I'm glad you know the truth," I said quietly. "And I'm glad you came." I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle between us. But we can't just go back to how it was. We can't jump over what's happened. Her eyes filled, but she nodded. "Then, what do we do?" "We start over," I said, "from here. We see each other sometimes. We talk. We build something new. Slowly, honestly." It wasn't what she'd come for, I could tell. But it was what I could give, and what I was willing to give. We talked for a while longer, about small things, work, the weather, the neighbor's new dog. Then she left, promising to call next week. I stood at the window and watched her walk to her car, the winter air lifting her hair. That night, I sat in my armchair with the lights low. I pulled out an old record, the one Lily's mother and I had danced to at our wedding. The needle crackled, and the soft melody filled the room. I closed my eyes, letting the music wrap around me. It wasn't joy, exactly, but it wasn't grief either. It was something in between. The quiet peace of knowing I'd done what I could, and the bittersweet ache of understanding that some distances can't be erased, only bridged, one careful step at a time. As the last notes faded, I smiled to myself. It wasn't the ending I'd wanted, but maybe it was the one we both needed.